Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nitai Gora Haribo 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Granthavat Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Krishna House ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. I understand you've been studying Canto 1 and you've worked your way up to chapter 16. The instructions I got was to make this more general for today and to choose a verse, which I went to something in the first canto, which is first canto, chapter 5, and it's text 16. Ooh, did I see? Yeah, 16. I chose this particular verse. Yes, I apologize if I misled, but you knew which verse it was, so well done. I'm over here with a few devotees from Europe. We're staying at the Bhaktivedanta Institute house nearby, and we've got a very serious work program for this month based on developing concepts for exhibits and presentations within the museum of the Vedic Planetarium, which is it's installed in the west wing of the Temple of Vedic Planetarium. So yesterday we spent a little time discussing the science of Krishna consciousness. And since this is what Srila Prabhupada stresses within this first canto from beginning and even from the introduction, and it pops up at various times through this canto, that Prabhupada is stressing for us to understand the science of Krishna consciousness. So I chose this particular verse for us to study, and I hope that's all right. The meter's a little tricky, but see how you get on with this. Vichakshano swarhati veditam vibor. Vichakshano swarhati veditam vibor. Ananta parasya nivrittita sukham. Ananta parasya nivrittita sukham. Pravartamanasya gunairanantmanas. Pravartamanasya gunairanatmanas. Tato bhavandarshaya chestitam vibo. Tato bhavandarshaya chestitam vibo. Vichakshanosvyarhati veditam vibor. Anantaparasya nivrittita sukham. Pravartamanasya gunairanatmanas. Tato bhavandarshaya chestitam vibo. Vichakshanosvyarhati veditam vibor. Anantaparasya nivrittita sukham. Pravartamanasya gunairanatmanas tato bhavandashayote stamo Vichakshanasyarhati Vedatam Vibhor Anantaparasya Nivrittita Sukham Pravartamanasya Gunairanatmanas Tato Bhavandashaya Chestitam Vibho. I'll read the synonyms. Vichakshana, very expert. Asya, of him. Arhati, deserves. Vedatum, to understand. Vibho, of the Lord. Anantaparasya, of the unlimited. Nivrittitaha, retired from. Sukham, material happiness. Pravartamanasya, those who are attached to. Gunai, by the material qualities. Anatmanaha, devoid of knowledge and spiritual value. Tata, therefore. Bhavan, your goodness. Darshaya, show the ways. Chestitam, activities. Vibho, of the Lord. Translation. Do you have a particular way of doing that, or just will I read it? Okay, all right, let's read together. The Supreme Lord is unlimited. Only a very expert personality, retired from the activities of material happiness, deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values. Therefore, those who are not so well situated due to material attachment should be shown the ways of transcendental realization by your goodness through descriptions of the transcendental activities of the Supreme Lord. And we read around the room with the PowerPoint? Yes. Someone like to read?
Theological science is a difficult subject, especially when it deals with the transcendental nature of God. It is not a subject matter to be understood by persons who are too much attached to material activities. Only the very expert, who have almost retired from materialistic activities by culture of spiritual knowledge, can be admitted to the study of this great science. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly stated that out of many hundreds and thousands of men, only one person deserves to enter into transcendental realization. And out of many thousands of such transcendentally realized persons, only a few can understand the theological science specifically dealing with God as a person. Shri Vyasadeva is therefore advised by Narada to describe the science of God directly by relating his transcendental activities. Vyasadeva is himself a personality expert in this science, and he is unattached to material enjoyment. Therefore, he is the right person to describe it, and Shukadeva Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, is the right person to receive it.
Someone would like to read the next bit?
Srimad Bhagavatam is the topmost theological science, and therefore it can react on the layman as medical doses. Therefore, it can react on the layman as medicinal doses. Because it contains the transcendental activities of the Lord, there is no difference between the Lord and the literature. The literature is the factual literary incarnation of the Lord. So the layman can hear the narration of the activities of the Lord. Thereby, they are able to associate with the Lord and thus gradually become purified from material diseases. The expert devotees also can discover novel ways and means to convert the non-devotees in terms of particular time and circumstance. Devotional service is dynamic activity, and the expert devotees can find out competent means to inject it into the dull brains of the materialistic population. Such transcendental activities of the devotees for the service of the Lord can bring a new order of life to the foolish society of materialistic men. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his subsequent followers exhibited expert dexterity in this connection. By following the same method, one can bring the materialistic men of this age of quarrel into order for peaceful life, transcendental realization.
Chakshanosyarhati vedatam vibhor anantaparasya nivrittita sukham pravartamanasya gunairanatmanas Tato Bhavan Darshaya Cheshtatum Vivo. The Supreme Lord is unlimited. Only a very expert personality retired from the activities of material happiness deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values. Therefore, those who are not so well situated due to material attachment should be shown the ways of transcendental realization by your goodness through descriptions of the transcendental activities of the Supreme Lord. Oh my God. Srila Prabhupada was very fond of describing the process, the methodology of Bhakti Yoga, and especially as it was presented in the pages of Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, as the science of God consciousness. And in our discussion yesterday, we were looking at what we mean by the methodologies of science. And there's an awful lot that can be said in that regard, but science is not a body of knowledge. It is a way of validating what I can have confidence in believing. That's ultimately what science works. It presents from certain observations, there will be a theory developed. Now, do I believe in that theory? Well, I have to see if it can be tested, if it has predictability, if it has falsifiability, and so on. If it has predictions, will they be replicated? Do others reach the same conclusion? And from all of that, it gives me confidence in the value of that theory as applied to how I am modeling the world around me. Science is a way of modeling our experience of the world. And it has chosen to use certain kind of parameters in order to do that. And they are devised in physics. They are then applied to the understanding in chemistry, and chemistry then is applied to biology. Biology then is applied to neuroscience. The difficulty with that process is that where is consciousness in that? In none of those processes do we find something that will describe the nature of our own consciousness. But the issue is that that's something real. Consciousness is the most real thing we can ever have confidence in knowing. There is nothing that we can have more confidence. I can't even have confidence that this table is here more than my own consciousness. Why? Because it is my awareness that is experiencing this. So my experience, my ability to experience, me as the experiencer, predicates everything else. In science, philosophy, whatever, consciousness is the starting point. And therefore, if I have a description of the world which cannot include my ability to observe it, I have not quite filled it out yet. Now, Jiva Goswami describes in his Tattva Sandarbha, which is, he has a treatise of 6 Sandarbhas, which really cover the full picture of the philosophy of Vaishnavism and Krishna consciousness. And that's why Srila Prabhupada often talks him as the greatest philosopher in our line, Jiva Goswami. The first of those Sandarbhas is called Tattva Sandarbha, and it's really dealing with epistemology. How do we know stuff? And in that, he analyzes the 3 main pramanas, the 3 ways of gaining evidence that are used in kind of Vaishnava processes. In other parts of the Vedas, there's extensions of those 3 pramanas to maybe 6. But when you look at them, they're really subcategories of the 3. And the 3 are, first, pratyaksha, direct observation, direct connection with something. And the next one, anumana, where it's kind of inductive thinking, or deductive thinking at times, or abductive thinking, where you're kind of extrapolating on what you see and you're theorizing, you're trying to understand the significance of what you've just observed. What does it mean? What's its relevance? How would that apply in another situation? You know, what's behind all of that? What's the cause? You know, so that's kind of anumana. And then there is shabda, hearing from authority. And the Vedas are very generous in talking about sources of authoritative knowledge. The typical example is, who's your da, as we'd say in Belfast, who's your da, you know? And the person who's going to tell you is your mother. So she becomes the authority. Your teachers at school are authorities, believe it or not. Because you've gone to them hoping that they have more knowledge than you have and they can enlighten you and they can give you kind of, and you know, like it or not, you know, later on we do look back and there's some teachers that we think were quite special and may have given us insights and ideas of things that really matter. And then there's, you know, wisdom that comes down, is passed down through the ages, and which we revere because it has stood the test of time. One example that was discussed yesterday was Australian Aborigines who have this song, I believe it's 100,000 verses or something. And you need to know this song to find your way as you traverse the outback of Australia. It's so big, it's so desolate, everything looks the same. One tree, one stone, one, you know, they all look the same. So without this song, you'll get lost. But because it's a song that can be learned, it is passed down, protected, unchanged from generation to generation to generation, and remains authoritative shabda, knowledge. And of course, we regard shabda, there's another category of shabda, and that is that which is descending from a supreme source of knowledge. Now, there's lots of things that we can learn from other humans. That's Purusheya Shabda, knowledge that we get from people. There's a lot of that that we can incorporate in our daily life, and we rely on that a lot. So we should never disdain other sources of Shabda. In fact, the culture, the Vedic culture, is one of gratitude and appreciation for any hints of wisdom that we gather from anyone, because we take that on, we benefit from it. And if we're getting something that benefits us, we feel grateful. But at the same time, there is a bigger picture that the ordinary knowledge cannot elucidate for us. And when that bigger picture is there, we need sources of knowledge that transcend the ordinary, that can reveal the nature of that which is beyond our ability or anybody's ability to see and interact with. Now, it's often kind of summarized that we say, well, science is pratyaksha. That's direct observation. That's what it's about. And philosophy may be anumana. And spirituality is shabda. Sometimes we put them in those categories. And the feeling that many devotees have is that we may be being simplistic in that picture, because really all quests for knowledge incorporate all three together. They complement one each other. And to give you the example, in ordinary kind of scientific discovery, say in physics or something, of course there is pratyaksha, observation, but then you kind of try to understand, well, what does this mean? What is this telling us? Is there some rule behind this? Is there some causation? Is there something that would have applicability elsewhere? You know, how can we use this information? Is there a rule behind it? And then it has to be kind of tested. And if it's tested, it becomes part of authority. To give a nice example, there was a group of Italian physicists a couple of years ago who said, we've just done a measurement of a signal that has gone faster than the speed of light. Big deal, big deal. Why? Not because of it contravened pratyaksha, not because it contravenes theory, but because it contravened Shabda. This was contravening Einstein, an authority, the authority that we have accepted that light as we understand it to be cannot move faster than a particular velocity. And so questions are raised. And it found that actually they'd done something like connect their machine to the pizza maker or something like that. And it had given a wrong result. So the actual reliance on authority in that case had told them, go back and check what you were doing, and you'll see that your pratyaksha, your processes haven't been quite right. And so they retested and found, yeah, no, actually we were wrong. So the scientific method relies on that. And what Srila Prabhupada has very clearly tried to explain to us all is that the spiritual process, the transcendental process, relies on pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda. We're not just hearing from Shastra. We have to hear from Shastra. We have to get insights to work on. We have to get insights to illuminate our path. But it is a process of pratyaksha. Bhagavad Gita 9.2, famous, lovely verse. Pratyaksha avagamam dharmyam. Agama, evidence. The evidence of pratyaksha. That's what establishes you in Krishna consciousness. Because this reveals the nature of the self by direct perception, Prabhupada says it is the perfection of religion. So in Krishna consciousness, we don't ask anyone to believe in something that they cannot prove to be true for themselves. Anything that is said in Srimad Bhagavatam, there is the opportunity to prove it for yourself. And we don't ask you to believe in it. We ask you to test it. We ask you to try it. Prabhupada would simply beg us, just try out Krishna consciousness. See if it works for you. You know, check it out. You know, do the practice, do the experiment. You are the lab. That's the nature of the exploration of consciousness. We were having a very good discussion with a gentleman called Jeff Dunn on Sunday. His mother was Brenda Dunn, who ran the Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research Labs in Princeton University on behalf of Robert John, who was the Dean of Engineering. And these were the experiments they did on connected, the challenge that they'd been set by McDonnell Aircraft, the guy who's in charge of all of that. He wanted to know, can human intention and consciousness affect the behavior of physical equipment? So they did experiments over 27 years to demonstrate, yes, individuals have a very small ability to change directly. But when we add up all the results of 800,000 experiments, we see that there is a mega kind of deviation from the expected kind of baseline of chance. So anyway, the reason we were speaking to her son was that we were setting up consciousness exploration workshops so that people can explore the nature of their own consciousness. And it fits in nicely how Prabhupada is saying, you know, that devotees can kind of think of ways and means to get people kind of tuned into this. And that's important. That's how Prabhupada was actually amazing in terms of how he structured ISKCON and the messages that he got and the way he and dynamic, and not just rely on the standard religious approach. Here we are, here's our scripture, you must believe in it, bow down, you know. Because A lot of people are turned off by that, frankly. I would have been, I think, if that had been how I was introduced to Krishna consciousness. Because as it's said here, this is Narad Muni explaining to Vyasadeva, and he's kind of, Vyasadeva is already full of knowledge, but Narad Muni is really just doing a bit of fine tuning in order to direct him to better his preaching, if you like, better his outreach activities, and particularly in his publications. He's done Vedanta Sutra, he's done Mahabharata, and these are great, but people are still they're not experimenting fully on the science of Krishna yet. So that's what Narad Muni is trying to get at. And because people are naturally attached to this body, to this life, to kind of what I can get out of it, how it does further my sense of enjoyment, how I can look after my security, how I can build my kind of relationships with those around me and so on. They haven't got much bandwidth left for spirituality, and they're not tuned into it. And therefore they get all sorts of misconceptions about what spirituality and spiritual life is about. And Prabhupada called this the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. 2 words that I think are really important. You can read them together, you can read them separately. There's so much you could say just on why we are the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. But religions talk about you should believe in the soul. A lot of people think, well, why are you making up something like the soul? What is this soul? That sounds pretty airy-fairy. Do we need a soul to explain anything? No. What is it? Where is it? Etc. But Prabhupada doesn't talk about the soul. He's talking consciousness. Are we making that up? No. Consciousness is real. So people can't just say, oh, why are you adding something new into the mix like a soul? No. We're talking about consciousness. We're talking about you as the experiencer believing that you exist. You know you exist. It's the most important aspect. Everything else in your life is predicated on the fact that I exist and therefore able to experience and enjoy it all. So existence is the most important, most vital, most real thing to us. That's consciousness. So we're not introducing some new thing. We're saying, have you really explored the thing that is actually most valuable to you? Have you really thought about that? Have you delved into it deeply? Or have you just been superficial? Just accepting everything that comes to you as an experience and just trying to vary that experience through sports, entertainment, work, relationships. It's just all trying to vary the experience. But you've never looked at the issue of being the experiencer and what that means. And because you haven't looked at that, because you haven't explored it, you've got no idea of the possibilities that are open to you that you could be experiencing. So much more than you could ever think about. And that comes to our next point, Krishna. That we can analyze the things of this world in various ways. We can model it very wonderfully in physics. It doesn't tell us exactly what matter is, why it got there, what it's about, but it is very useful because we can generally predict the interactions according to our model. That model doesn't cover everything, and that's why there are anomalous phenomena, because the model isn't actually big enough to take in the sort of anomalous phenomena that Princeton University was exploring. But it works pretty well, and when it works well, we get a gadget out of it. We get a little technology. We get something to play with, something that is supposedly making our life better. And we wouldn't, none of us want to turn the clock back. in that respect. You know, we're actually quite attached. We have become very attached to these things. But it's still just a very small picture of what we can experience. And then when you kind of get into the depths of, you know, science, philosophy, and so on, the question becomes, well, where does it all come from? And I think a lot of people get into these realms of philosophy and science because they kind of do want to know that question. Where is everything coming from? Where is it all from? And this is the question that is raised at the beginning of the Vedanta Sutra. Tato Brahma Jigyasa. Tato means now, and then that what? Often there's different kind of interpretations of then, but the simplest one is, now that at least you're a human being, you've got that intellect, got that ability, got the opportunity, you should be inquiring after Brahman, the absolute truth. That which, and then we have to ask, well, what is Brahman? Janmadhyasya yataha. That from which everything else comes, the source of all existence. And it's not, you know, again, when people talk about God, they think, oh, why are you bringing your imaginary friend into this? You know, you're making things up again. You're just adding another factor. But when we talk about the absolute source, the ultimate source of origin of everything, that's not unreal. It's perfectly rational to propose that everything that exists has a source. And let's agree that we'll call that's the ultimate, you know, source of all existence. Let's just say that we may have different thoughts of what that is, but we all agree that there is an ultimate source. And the Vedanta phrase, Janmadi Asya Yataha, that from which everything comes. That from which everything comes, that is Janma Adi. Everything that can be created, maintained, and destroyed, everything that is within the purview of time, everything that you can encompass through the direct perception of your senses, or even you can speculate on, contained within this cosmos, we're beyond that. It's something that is beyond that. And it's interesting that physics only in recent decades has actually succumbed to the conclusion that we can't just say this universe popped out of nothing and there was no time, no space, there was nothing before then, and we don't even have to ask that question. Now everyone is asking that question. What is the ultimate source? What is happening beyond the Janma Adi? Yeah? So now at least we've got something to discuss. And the question then is, we're not making up something. We're saying there is something, a phenomenon there to be explored. How will you explore it? Well, you have to ask this question. Is that ultimate source inert, dull, unconscious? Or is it conscious, sentient? That becomes the big question for anyone. You already believe in an ultimate source, but do you believe it is inert or conscious? Now, the interesting thing is that I'm conscious, you're conscious, still, even after the class. And yeah, so we focus in the Bhaktivedanta Institute on this issue of consciousness because it's becoming very clear that it is not possible, or it is increasingly problematic and difficult to reconcile the actual nature of consciousness with that which we know within the physical realm. The simple statement that, oh, consciousness is just a product of the brain, product of physics, it doesn't stand up as anything more than conjecture or a belief at this moment. There is nothing in pratyaksha, Nothing even in antimatter. There isn't even a theory to build on that one. So it just becomes a kind of matter of belief. But if matter can't produce consciousness, how can you assume that the ultimate source of everything can be inert and produce consciousness? It makes much more sense logically, and this is, and we admit that this could be a discussion point, inert or conscious, but the likelihood is that the ultimate source is conscious. Now, if you're a scientist and you've got two options to explore, ultimate source inert, ultimate source conscious, and you look at them, if the ultimate source beyond this cosmos, beyond everything, is inert, what process of knowledge will get me there? How will I ever be able to interact with that? How will I explore it through my scientific processes? I can't. But if the ultimate source is conscious, is there a chance of scientifically exploring it? Of that entity. Why? Because there can be a relationship between two conscious entities. Now, someone might think, well, we're just tiny little things, and God, this source thing, conscious thing, is very big. How will there ever be any contact? You may doubt, you may be skeptic, but the possibility at least exists in theory. And if you're a scientist and you've got two things you would like, two options to explore, one of them you can't do anything with. Zip, nada, nothing. You can do nothing with it. But the other one opens up a possibility. If you were sitting in front of your PhD advisor and you said, I've got two things I want to explore. One, I can't do anything. And the other, well, it's iffy. But I'm thinking that there's a possibility that there could be this interaction. The advisor would say, well, go and see what's written about it. Do the literature review. Oh, what book should I pick up to do the literature review about how to interact with the absolute source of all existence? Oh, well, this might, do for a start, Srimad Bhagavatam, And that gets us on the path. That gets us on the path of experimentation. So this reading the Srimad Bhagavatam is our literature review. Now, understand where you're at in terms of what is being described here. Where are you at in the experimental process? What have you gained so far? Because everyone has gained something. No one comes to Krishna consciousness empty-handed in spirituality. You've already got something powerful, behind you on this. Maybe in this lifetime, maybe in many lifetimes. So understand where you're at this point. Understand how am I, and it's mentioned here, situated in terms of my attachments, my motivations, and what do I need to orientate? How do I need to prepare myself as the laboratory for the Bhakti experiment so that actually I can have direct evidence of the aspects of Krishna, the absolute truth. So that becomes our process, scientific process, and really everything we are doing in Krishna consciousness is to encourage people, it is worth making this experiment, because when we have the bigger picture and understand more about ourselves, we're going to make less mistakes about, messing ourselves up in this material world. And ultimately, we'll find the fulfillment that our pure consciousness deserves. So, Hare Krishna. We got a couple of minutes, I think, for... have we got a... Or at the back, he's got the microphone already, so... Oh, yeah. Yeah, thanks.
I just have a quick comment. The thing that I think about in hearing your class today, thank you very much. Bravo, by the way. That was very inspiring. That the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. How do you know that the Bhagavat, Shastra, and Bhakti process is true? Because it gives the experience that it promises when you do what it says to do.
That's a very important point. There's lots, and it's not just at one end product. There's lots of milestones that are described. And the other thing about the scientific method that we must bear in mind and we must apply is peer review. Check your realizations, check your insights, check your feelings with other devotees. You'll find that there is so much common ground. This is a replicable process. You know, people say, well, it's subjective and we need an objective science. But most science these days actually is a lot of subjective experiments aggregated. And when they're aggregated and there's a common trend, we call that objective. And Krishna consciousness fits within that. You know, there are common experiences that we will all undergo in the path to Krishna consciousness. And if we keep checking in the association of devotees, we'll recognize those little highlights, milestones, you know, that come up all the way. And we're starting to recognize we're on the path as being described is opening up for me. So thank you. That's a very good point.
Hare Krishna. Prabhu, at one point you were saying that there are two options, either that the absolute truth is conscious or that, I mean, the source is conscious or it's inert. And then you kind of dismissed the possibility of it being inert on the basis that we can't study that. We can't have an interaction with an inert source. So
no, I rejected it on the basis that our current evidence on Earth is that we cannot explain how consciousness arises from something that is inert. So that's a direct perception at the moment. Now, it's for many people, they want to continue believing that no, we'll find consciousness from matter, but it's becoming more and more difficult. And particularly in the last few decades, it is just becoming unsolvable. After I was here in June, I went to New York for a conference of the Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness. 700 delegates, most of them neuroscientists, some philosophers, 20% I think philosophers, really looking at these questions. Can we explain consciousness by what we know in physics, biology, neuroscience? We're nowhere near it. And I talked with David Chalmers, who's the guy who coined the phrase "hard problem" 25 years ago. There was a whole bet went on between him and a guy called Christoph Koch, who worked with Francis Crick. Within 25 years, they have discovered the neural correlates for consciousness. Koch and Christoph and Francis Crick believed it would be, so there was a bet, and the bet was up. And so they had a big kind of reveal of and the conclusion was no. And in fact, David Chalmers took the bet for the next 25. He says, no problem, I'll take your bet for the next 25 years. You're not going to find it. And now they're trying to explore more things. So that is the question mark that has to be there. That if that which is inert, matter, cannot produce consciousness, don't assume that the absolute truth could be inert. That's the reason for at least questioning that as an option. And the second one is that it can't.
Is it more or less accepted now by scientists that life cannot arise from matter?
It's definitely, I mean, life is another matter because they are looking, you know, they're not willing to ascribe consciousness as necessarily the criterion for life. But in terms of explaining how we are conscious and the nature of our consciousness in terms of matter, that's now accepted as problematic. There was a very nice statement by Brian Greene. You know Brian Greene? He's a one of the actually the world's top presenters on physics, written some interesting books, and he's feted everywhere. He's actually the half brother of one of our devotees, Yogeshwar, and he was speaking on this point recently, and this is how scientists, I think, look at it. First of all, they're not a unified body by any means. They're as mixed and diverse in their belief systems as anyone else. But Brian Greene's point was, we understand that how is it possible? I mean, just how is it possible that this thing we call consciousness could emerge from quarks, from quantum fields, from whatever you try to imagine, we think we know in physics? How on earth are you going to get consciousness? He says, it's not solved. We haven't got a theory. We don't know. He says, I just wish to believe that in the future, we might explain it. But there are plenty of others who say, no, you've got a fundamentally distinct phenomenon called consciousness. Why do you think it will ever fit into your bits and pieces, your toolbox of physics, no matter how far you dig? Not until, if physics could dig back to Brahman, they'd go, oh yes, now we found consciousness. It was there all along, and it was the actual origin. Oh, the source is conscious. So that's the only direction, I'm afraid.
And how do they, I mean, it seems unreasonable to make a distinction between consciousness and life. What is the basis for that?
Because they say life is simply a process by which certain interactions, biological interactions, can occur. And that really all life is doing is it's a very interesting structure that takes energy into its system, and therefore is able to create a metabolism, something that, sustaining system of chemical reactions, and has reduced reproducibility. So most science is only now beginning to explore the nature of consciousness in other creatures. In fact, they dedicated an afternoon of the conference to the various experiments that are going on in this. And it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. I remember one conversation I had with Roger Penrose, who won the Nobel Prize last year. He's spoken a lot about consciousness, and he was discussing the idea that consciousness must go down into the other species. How far, we don't know. And we were discussing how evidence for very simple creatures is now available, and even for plants. He said, oh, that'll be a problem for the vegetarians.
Wondering, on the topic of epistemology itself, we have these three categories. And it seems that for any kind of spiritual knowledge, definitely Shabda is a very pivotal type of epistemology. Whereas in the material sciences, which this world is very preoccupied with, there's definitely a tendency to focus more on, was it pratyaksha? So it's almost like the thinkers of the world have I don't want to say an aversion, but they're just not used to the epistemology of Shabda. And even their authorities, they'll like cut them down very happily if they can find some better pratyaksha. So how do we help, or how do we make this vast body of knowledge more of an accepted authority? Because I've spent a little bit of time in the academic world, and there's never any focus really on the ancient wisdom of the Vedas or anything.
No, but let me give you this perspective. Shabda is important. Authority is, and science is an iterative process. That'll always be said. Of course, it seems to move very quickly, and therefore it seems to reject things quite quickly. For instance, Newton would be considered, an absolute authority, and his way of modeling the activities of physical objects was taken as sacrosanct, for hundreds of years. Then along comes Einstein, turns it upside down with relativity. We've now got another way of looking at it. That doesn't mean Newtonian physics doesn't work in terms of how an object would be dropped. I'm not going to drop your glasses. But on other scales, in other situations, it doesn't work. In fact, one of the ladies who came with us to work at the PI is working on what's called modified Newtonian dynamics. The nature of, is there a way of bringing Newton in instead of Einstein? But yes, it seems that they reject, like Archimedes, Aristotle was the basis for kind of early science for over 1,000 years. Then, Bacon and Newton and others kind of became the authorities. And now Einstein and, of course, some of the quantum guys are starting to become authorities. But it's moving so quickly into such a kind of amorphous world of physics that no one can be sure of anything that they have ever heard before, But there is a system like that here in the Bhagavatam, and Narad Muni is giving it. He's saying, Vyasadeva, you wrote Mahabharata. That's Shabda, but it's not good enough. That's why you're dissatisfied. Because it's really only stressing certain aspects of Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, religiosity, material development, kind of happy enjoyment and sattvic enjoyment in this world, and liberation, which sounds amazing. You say, but you've got to take it further. So in one sense, Vyasadeva is being asked to upgrade his own authority, And then in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, it talks about Nigabakalpataro Galatam Phalam, Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam, how this nature of the Shukamukad, that the nature of the Parampara, the passing down of the sweetest mangoes from the top of the tree down to one person to another, just handed down so it reaches the ground untouched. That sounds like unchanged. But in the same verse, it's talking about the parrot who touches that fruit, makes it sweeter, makes it more relative. And that's what Prabhupada is talking about in the purport. We are updating Srimad Bhagavatam in many ways. We're trying to make it more relevant, more relishable, more understandable, more acceptable, more kind of useful to the modern age. Prabhupada is doing that in his purports. We're doing that as his disciples in trying to take this on and give it to others. So in one sense, there is still an iterative process at work. Now, you do not change the fundamentals. You do not change the original truth. We're not presenting someone else as that ultimate supreme personality of Godhead. We're not providing another process other than bhakti. But we're trying to illuminate, the science of it and help people practice it in this age. Okay, we're done. All right, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki.